Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, light things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, JJ Vance here, host of Operation GCD, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, I will be your folks of the interwebs. I will be your pilot and navigator for this evening's shenanigan infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And not gonna lie to you folks, got a real barn burner on deck here tonight. More or less picking up sort of where I left off in last week's Operation GCD Live, and in fact Friday's last week as well, surrounding the topic of one legendary Hollywood producer known as Cocaine Bob Evans, aka Robert Evans. But to honor the wishes of the dead, he gave himself the name Cocaine Bob, and I shall honor his wishes. Anyhow, you might have seen him in the image there tonight for tonight's show. But tonight's show is actually Marvel and DC Comics Thelemic fan fiction ? So that's going to be an interesting journey here as we discuss this tonight. It's been it's going to be a very ancient alien cargo cult conversation, if you will. One of my favorite topics of conversation here on Operation GCD. And rumor has it, these ancient alien cargo cults, they haunt the moon's pale beams. So it's they come in all shapes and sizes, but they do seem to work together. These these ancient alien cargo cults, that is. So the question being is, where does Marvel Comics really come from? And what are the philosophies and these ideas that are perpetrated in these films? Where do they come from? as it seems these are some of the biggest, these Marvel and DC comics. They are some of the biggest budget films in Hollywood these days, right? And they're not the only Ancient Alien Cargo Cult tales we see in Hollywood. For example, all of these Marvel and DC comics, no different than Scientology, an offshoot of Thelema, no different than Scientology. These Marvel and DC comics tales, the narratives and tales of the film series Star Wars that has been had its stronghold on American psyche for, at least in the Western world, and if not most of the rest of the world, for the past 40 some years, right? So with rehashes and remakes and series and offshoots and Lord knows what else. I've lost track. I enjoy the original films, but all of these, what I'm getting at is all of these tales take place in a galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago. So no different than Star Wars. These Marvel and DC comic films have really perpetrated the ideas of these ancient alien cargo cults in our, in our modern psyche, and really I would say I really have a stranglehold amongst them, as far as, these are some of the most popular films in recent years, and the actors and actresses that comprise the stars of these films are some of the most well-known A-list folks, in the world. It's not just America, at least the Western world, right? Although I feel like China is a big fan of Hollywood and Marvel films, etc. So again, these concepts are really worldwide, and the origin story of this is quite interesting with Marvel and DC comics. I mean, they're really born out of the pulp fiction, sci-fi pulp fiction, and the really tonight's whole narrative really focuses around a fellow by the name of Forrest J. Ackerman, legendary Hollywood monster magazine fella, publisher, and more notable to tonight's conversation, literary agent for Yayo Bob. Yes, sir. Ready for some Yayo Bob. He you can see him there with Stan Lee. It was Stan Lee who largely is credited with making Marvel comics, and I'll get to that in a minute. That's why I use the photo of old Cocaine Bob and Stan Lee on the cover there, image for tonight. And I like to say that these these cultists, they flock together, and the Process Church, which Cocaine Bob is most associated with, along with his activities and friends. For example, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, that is, as he's the one who facilitated that marriage between those two. And again, he's credited later with the cleanup crew. I think it was in 1976 or 77 there, when Roman Polanski had apparently diddled a 13-year-old on Jack Nicholson's couch, one of Cocaine Bob's other good buds. So it's interesting to see those intersections between these characters and these different cult aspects. And it is this Forrest Ackerman fella, this literary agent, who coined the term sci-fi, actually. So the term sci-fi is as a result and thanks to old Forrest J. Ackerman. And he's a major figure in all things sci-fi. But where he comes into play here is he was the ringleader of sorts. He didn't found this sci-fi writers club, but again, he coined the term sci-fi. He's a literary agent for a lot of these folks in this club. Not just L. Ron Hubbard, which that's where he comes into play tonight with the crossover with the OTO, the Agape Lodge of the OTO there in Pasadena, with Jack Parsons, whose birth name was, in fact, Marvel Jack Parsons. And, of course, DC Comics, I would assert, also pays tribute to Parsons through their Suicide Squad, which was their, Parsons team of rocket engineers that helped him create solid-state rocket fuel through apparent sex magic rituals. Now, these are apparently separate from his Babylon working rituals. So I like to point out that maybe he's doing some sex magic rituals by day for this rocket fuel, and then these Babylon working rituals by night with old L. Ron Hubbard, that is, to create the whatever they were looking to do, whatever weird shit they were after. There's a couple of stories there. I don't know. Nonetheless, I think that's an important thing as we unpack this narrative here this evening, folks of the interwebs. This narrative of what is the origin of Marvel and DC Comics, and seemingly surrounds this character Forrest J. Ackerman. So, and like I said, one of the things he points out when he's pointing out some of the tales around L. Ron Hubbard is that he California's a hotbed for cult activity, and these cults do cross over. So when you see Stan Lee there with if he is indeed the head of a Thelemic fan fiction outfit known as Marvel Comics, well, I'm not surprised that he's taking photographs and hanging out with old Cocaine Bob. Once again, Cocaine Bob deeply involved in process activity, so this crossover, again, the process being an offshoot, or perhaps a Darkwing still to this day, of Scientology, and Scientology being L. Ron Hubbard's offshoot from the Agape Lodge of the OTO. And a lot of these similar principles kind of exist in between all these organizations, it seems, including Ancient Alien Cargo Cult nonsense. So, again, get into some more of those things here, folks of the interwebs, and just wanted to point out this one photograph here before we go any further as far as how these folks, cross over and intersect. So this here's John Travolta on the set of Devil's Reign, along with Anton LaVey. This is 1974, and this is when John Travolta joined Scientology. He gets recruited on the set of this film, and he wasn't the only Scientologist there doing this Devil's Reign film with, old Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, as the technical advisor on the film. The same role he had when he was the technical advisor on Cocaine Bob and Roman Polanski's 1968 film, Rosemary's Baby. That satanic shit show of a cinematic disaster. I got nothing good to say about the film, quite honestly, and I don't have much good to say about Cocaine Bob or any of his friends. I'm not gonna lie to you, folks. So anyhow, these cults do seem to cross over, and that is the message in which old L. Ron's friend Forrest J. Ackerman describes how he got started in Scientology, right, and how he first met L. Ron. And I got a couple clips here to show us here on those topics. So once again, thanks for joining me here this evening, folks, of the interwebs, to get a little GCD. And this may be an obscure topic for some folks, but once again, these, like I pointed out, these ideas that are perpetrated through these comic books and now Hollywood blockbuster films have really grasped the psyche of the world. And I think it's, in my honest opinion, as a former Ancient Alien Cargo Cultist myself of the Mormon variety, which not that far off from what whatever Joseph Smith was channeling through his angel, alien, or demon, whatever you want to call it, into transcribing what was known as the Book of Mormon. Crowley went through the same process with the Book of the Law, and transcribing that from some being, some little gray alien looking fucker, So it's always aliens. It's always ceremonial magic with these folks. And I would argue sex magic is probably was at least at the root, if not still may in fact be at the root of some of the polygamy activities in around Joseph Smith's Mormonism. But nonetheless, ancient alien cargo cults of many varieties, they all do a lot of the same stuff, and they all seem to coincide and hang out with one another, or at least agree in large concepts, most notably alien stuff. So in the concept of all of these things with the Science Fiction Writers Club run by Forrest J. Ackerman, and how all of the folks that started Marvel and DC Comics, and the characters you're most familiar with, including characters such as Superman, they all revolve around Forrest J. Ackerman, this cult scene in the late 30s and early 40s, L. Ron Hubbard, and as Forrest J. Ackerman says, as he explains the cult scene, he says, well, this is an interview he gave in the late 90s, maybe circa 97. He says, it's Southern California at the time. Everyone was into the cult scene. So, Hubbard introduced them to the Sci-Fi Writers Club, as he explains it. Introduced them to one thing. Hubbard was doing one thing and introduced that to the club, and then Hubbard started his own thing as his thing, if you will. Do your thing, if you will. These cultists are always after their own thing. Their egotistical things and whatnot. But Ackerman says that Hubbard comes up with his new thing, which is Scientology, in which the Sci-Fi Writers Club there that he ran, he explains it as most of the membership, if not all, just jumped on board. It was the new thing. It was the new thing to do, right? So I think that's very interesting and very, I think that's an important factor here in considering the storylines and narrative surrounding the origin story of these comic books and now films of these ancient alien cargo cult varieties in Marvel and DC. But so it's not just the name Marvel Comics, right? Which I would strongly argue is a tribute to Jack Parsons. Born Marvel Whiteside Parsons, he would later be nicknamed Jack Parsons. So, and then again, his Suicide Squad is the folks that invented the solid state rocket fuel. And, I find that kind of odd that DC runs this, a narrative of all their kind of villain, superhero or super squad of villains as the Suicide Squad. So it's, I think that's another tribute, right? But before we get further down that road, and I'm also trying to get ahead of this chat at all in any regard, but I appreciate y'all folks bearing with me here. As we had some technical difficulties in a rain delay situation, but we're cruising now and back on track, and I'm way behind in the chat. But let me get y'all introduced here to Forrest J. Ackerman. As I said, Marvel Comics really starts with Stan Lee, because it wasn't being called Marvel Comics until the early 60s, and Stan Lee, and that's New York City, and Old Cocaine Bob and Stan Lee go way back. That photograph and the cover art was from 2005, but they're a longtime friends from back in New York days there. So that's very interesting. I think that's very the fact that this comic book kind of existed, and most of the Marvel characters that you folks are familiar with, be it Spider-Man, be it Iron Man, all these folks, the Fantastic Four, all that stuff that came out from Marvel, that's all attributed to the Stan Lee era with Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. But Stan Lee's the head editor and whatnot. He's the man in charge. So before that, it existed from 1939 or so, about 22 years to about 1961. But that earlier era, there were superheroes and whatnot, not the more notable ones, although Superman was created back, that during that era. Once again, for Forrest Ackerman's friends. But there's obviously, what I'm getting at is there's obviously evolutions here, right, with some of this stuff. So it's intriguing to me that this character Stan Lee would then adapt the name Marvel as the overall name of the comic book, even though the name Marvel was being used back in 1939, I believe October of 1939. So that's an interesting date too, considering, all things considered around those matters of the OTO lodge there in Pasadena, and with Parsons and Hubbard and whatnot. But the Forrest J. Ackerman, if you haven't heard of him, like I said, super interesting character, literary agent for basically every sci-fi writer you can think of in our modern era. Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, again, L. Ron Hubbard, many others. But he was also not the founder of this writers club, but again, the leader, right? And he famous Monsters magazine guy, which actually Marvel would later emulate his famous Monsters and magazines. They would later use some of the elements that he was doing in publishing and whatnot and emulate Forrest J. Ackerman. So he was kind of a front runner in a lot of these activities. But here's L. Ron's old buddy dating back to 1938, Forrest J. Ackerman.
This is an interview with Forrest Ackerman. Forrest, can I begin by asking you, can you tell me about the first time you ever met Ron Hubbard?
Yeah, I think it was about 1938. I was in a second-hand bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard near Western. And before I could pay out, there was a dramatic-looking young redhead was enthralling the proprietress, telling her that he had just got a world record for gliding. I never did find out if it was for being in the air the longest time or going the greatest distance or the greatest height or whatever it was, but the next thing I knew, he was telling her that he'd been published in the pulp magazines ever since 1932. And he was rattling off westerns and mysteries and Oriental stories and romances, and I was waiting for the magic word to hear science fiction, but I didn't hear it. So I spoke up and I said, did you ever write any science fiction? And L. Ron Hubbard, on the spur of the moment, just extemporaneously said, well, no, but you know, here in Southern California, 35,000 years from now, there could be a new ice age. And he was off and running, just out of his mouth came a whole science fiction plot.
Astonishing, astonishing. Now,
And that is what old L. Ron Hubbard was known for, is a bunch of bullshit, you know. So sounds like he was bullshitting his new friend Forrest Ackerman and his soon-to-be literary agent. So those pulp magazines that Ackerman was referencing was where Hubbard made his name and getting, you know, paid for a penny per letter, you know, stories of sci-fi fiction. And I believe he holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the most amount of sci-fi bullshit ever written, so, or published. So, you know, you'll have that, I guess. So Ackerman will introduce us to another very important factor, I think, in this entire narrative relative to all this alien bullshit. Disregard ancient alien cargo cult business. As what I would assert, part of what is being done in the perpetration of these, not only these concepts and ideas in society, but it's also they're being done so, I would argue, in some sort of hypnotic fashion, because these are being done by folks who are experts in hypnosis. And that's, I think, one of the things that's so gripping about Scientology, kind of listening to folks who depart that religion. Pardon me. You know, they claim, you know, a very hypnotic effect of the entire affair, you know, be it the holding the cans or just, you know, going through the levels or whatever else is going on there, whatever other Xenu prescribed principles. So, but I do think that's important. And Ackerman will introduce us here in a moment to the next time he sees L. Ron, he claims, after 38, although he doesn't really describe how much they get into there in 38, because the next time he describes is that, you know, after they were both in uniform during World War II. And I'm like, well, wait a second. It's a number of years that have passed there with L. Ron in Los Angeles after meeting Forey, and he's already Forey Ackerman here. He's already in charge of that Sci-Fi Writers Club. In fact, he revives that Sci-Fi Writers Club, I believe, in July of 39. And I believe that's in around the same time they're publishing that first Marvel comics, right? And again, it had some very proto superhero folks, more sci-fi stuff, right? The what we know today as Marvel Comics is largely attributed to the Stan Lee era, you know, Cocaine Bob's friend. And also Stan Lee, towards the end of his life, was going to Comic Cons and other conventions and signing his name for autograph sessions in his own blood. Well, apparently his blood, but someone's blood, you know, which that's fucking creepy. That doesn't scream cult activity. I really don't know what does. Let me look here. So that's what I was saying, 39. So we go back to 37 is when DC Comics, right? So we'll take it back a notch. Take it back a couple more notches. So L. Ron meets Forrest Ackerman in 38 there in Los Angeles. L. Ron's already writing pulp fiction and these pulp novels out of New York City, because he starts that in 1932. And he, you know, as he was describing, that L. Ron was already a published author, but they're not sci-fi yet, right? But they are in these pulp fiction, you know, publications and magazines, right? Which again, that's what Forey Ackerman was like, the LA guy and all that, in those kind of operations. And again, the literary agent for a lot of these folks, a lot of the writers. So a very key figure in that regard. But what I'm getting at with L. Ron is he's back in college in 32, and he doesn't complete school, but he drops out after a couple years there at George Washington University. His college roommate was a fellow by the name of Paul Linebarger. Speaking of hypnosis and psychological operations, Paul Linebarger would, during the war, you know, as I was saying, Ackerman was citing that he was in uniform, and Hubbard was in uniform, hypnotizing folks there at the Sci-Fi Writers Club in Los Angeles. And Paul Linebarger, during the war, he was L. Ron's roommate at George Washington University. But during, years later there in World War II, he's the chief of psychological operations for the U.S. Army. Well, not the chief, but he writes the book on psychological operations. So he's the expert in psychological operations. He writes the U.S. Army manual for psychological operations, Paul Linebarger, which I believe was the manual used until rewritten by Michael Aquino in the late 60s. I'm not mistaken. So that's an interesting fact with this whole group of, Thelemic cultists and Ancient Alien Cargo Cultists here, right? The fact that there's not only this hypnosis factor, there's the psychological operations factor. And again, I'm not saying Paul Linebarger was a cultist. I don't know. He was a sci-fi writer, though. He wrote under the name Cordwainer Smith. And his literary agent and publisher, Forrest J. Ackerman. So that was, I think the first time that was published between those two, that combo, Ackerman and Linebarger, that would have been 1950. So L. Ron's in school with him from 32 to 34. He meets Ackerman in 38. He links up Ackerman, ostensibly links up Ackerman, it seems, with Linebarger in 50, because in 1950, by Ackerman's own admission, he was still a Scientologist. So he was, like I said, that he claims that the whole group, they were doing L. Ron's thing that he was doing over there, which they don't cite it in the longer, bit of that interview. He doesn't cite that, the things or whatever. But if you look at what L. Ron was doing, that thing was the Agape Lodge of the OTO, right? Thelema, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons. So then, and Ackerman stuck around for a while with Scientology and his buddy L. Ron. Well, and that was past the time in which he starts representing and publishing Linebarger. But I presume Linebarger was probably already a member of that Sci-Fi Writers Club, because, like I said, he's not Ackerman doesn't represent everyone in that club, but he is the club's ringleader, right? And again, he apparently the club was in disarray started in 36, disarray in like 39. He's the one who got behind it. And again, he's this major figure, and again, the guy who coined sci-fi, so the term sci-fi. So but the psychological operation, I think, is important, just like the hypnosis. And so, then this, L. Ron's clearly, he's a prolific individual, that L. Ron Hubbard. So he's maintaining his network, it seems like, amongst these individuals for many years. So what he was doing there in Los Angeles with Ackerman in between the years of 38 and 43, when the war begins, right? When does the war begin? World War II start date. Let's see that. Nope. For America. I don't even know that date. Let's look. It was 41. My mistake. December 7th, 1941. So we got a good two plus years there. Almost 3, perhaps even. You never know with the exact dates here, but 2+. Where these fellows are doing something in Los Angeles, and like Ackerman says, it gets quite culty there amongst this crew of sci-fi writers in Los Angeles, and that's exhibited by their behaviors, I would argue. So, but it is DC Comics in 37 that in this whole mix of times, like I said, so you got that whole L. Ron Hubbard network of stuff around Ackerman and his folks and psychological operations, and in a moment I'll point out L. Ron Hubbard's hypnotic abilities here, as quoted by Forrest Ackerman. But the back to the comic book narrative. So all of that's kind of going around again with the initial onset of Marvel at the same time there in 39, as Ackerman's reorganizing this the Sci-Fi Writers Club. But if you go back to 37, when DC Comics was started with Superman, well, once again, you're going to find Forrest J. Ackerman in the mix. So the reign of Superman was the first introduction of Superman. Like I said, DC Comics starts in 37, but the reign of Superman was actually written in 33. But this is how DC Comics began. This was their first major character there, by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. It was the writer-artist duo's first published use of the name Superman, which they later applied to their archetypal fictional superhero. And again, that was started in, let's see here, precise date here. And it was 37, but let's look here. It's first published in 37. What a date here, Wikipedia, source of all information on the interwebs. Yeah, it's not giving us a date here. Detective Comics 1937. Like I said, they've all kind of gone through their name changes, right? But Detective Comics obviously just being shortened to DC Comics later. But yeah, 37 is when they first published that. It says 33 is the first, introduction to Superman, but this is, I don't know how widely published that short story was. And there was some controversy over the publishing of it, right? And that controversy was all drudged up by none other than Schuster and Siegel's friend, Forrest J. Ackerman. So the last 2 pages of the story feature a reporter named Forrest Ackerman, an early example of what would come to be known as Tuckerization. The real Ackerman was not only a friend of Siegel and Schuster, but actually has a brief review on the same page of the fanzine as the last page of the story, in which the character named after him appears. So, and he kind of, it was a little bit of a marketing ploy too, right? He was like, oh, he's the writer, he's the editor, he's the literary agent for these gents. He's they include him in the first Superman story there, and he's the guy kind of I would argue pulling a lot of the strings, behind the scenes with a lot of these folks as far as publishing and ideas go, right? Because who decides what ideas get published, and who decides who's going to publish, who's going to write those ideas? I think there's a lot to be said there. So obviously, old Forey Ackerman, major figure, L. Ron Hubbard's buddy. So, and just on the topic here, folks, if you're not familiar with the, so DC obviously starts well before Marvel, but there's always been this kind of crossover between the two as well. And notably, the character, the most notable example, at least, the character Shazam, right? So, AKA Captain Marvel. So this character's been made into films in recent years as well. The Shazam films, they, I believe, they ended up settling the lawsuit with over copyright laws or names or whatever, trademarks for the name Captain Marvel. Maybe just change it to Lieutenant Marvel, Major Marvel, and call it a day. But I think they fought it out over some lawsuits, and eventually Captain Marvel was won by Captain Marvel because they had it, they made that in films in recent years with the female superhero lady doing Avenger stuff, doing her own standalone series. I think maybe one with Spider-Man. It's hard to keep track. But DC Comics did Shazam. That was for a while. That comic was named Captain Marvel. It was a DC comic, but Shazam was named Captain Marvel. So again, these films are everywhere. These ideas are everywhere, and they're all tales from a galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago. And I do believe that many of these tales, in the manner in which they're prescribed to humanity at large through these big budget Hollywood films, these whatever the popular medium is of the day, be it the Pulp Fiction magazines, be it the comic books of the 60s, or be it the cartoons of the 80s and 90s, or now the big budget films. These things continue to be perpetrated on humanity, these ideas and concepts. I would argue it's all from a cult of I would argue probably a small network, generally speaking, relatively speaking, but a small network of wealthy cultists, ancient alien cargo cultists, who seek to convince the rest of society to adhere to their batshit Looney Tunes philosophies regarding ancient alien cargo cults, superpowers, galactic overlords. We got it all. In fact, Scientology's got it all. Scientology's got the again, an offshoot of the Agape Lodge there of Thelema. They have a galactic overlord. Marvel's got, they've got a number of them. So does DC Comics. The one most probably notable folks' brain holes is Thanos. He's the galactic overlord in all the Avengers films and whatnot, and he's got some shocking similarities to Scientology's Xenu. And all of these comics, Marvel and DC, they all do superpowers. You know who else does superpowers? L. Ron Hubbard's folks down there in Scientology in Clearwater. In fact, when they revamped that big flagship building, there's a big portion of it that was revamped to, tens, millions of dollars. They call it the superhero building. So apparently Scientologists go in there to learn superpowers. I'm sorry, they call it disregard. These superpowers building. They go in there to become superheroes, though, I think. I don't know what they do in there, but apparently they learned superpowers. And I do believe there's a psychological operations kind of aspect to all these Marvel and DC tales and the ancient alien cargo cult concepts they want to convince folks of here, and putting folks brain holes and psyche and the conversation, because again these films are very gripping. They're not so much the storyline, I guess, but there's a lot of lights, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of special effects. It'll catch your attention. So when you're talking psychological operations and L. Ron Hubbard's college roommate Paul Linebarger, who was associate of Forrest Ackerman, and you're talking hypnosis, because that's a going trend here as well amongst this whole kind of LA Thelema offshoot crowd, right? Because Charles Manson was also known, back to Cocaine Bob. Charles Manson was also known, fellow process, folk there with Cocaine Bob and Charles, that is Manson, and Polanski and Tate, and Manson was notorious for his abilities of hypnosis. Manson was also a Scientologist and a process folk, member. So he fits squarely within this whole crowd around these topics and matters relative to this Thelemic fan fiction of Marvel and DC Comics. It seems like the hypnosis and psychological operations is a going trend. And don't take my word for it. Just listen to Forrest J. Ackerman, L. Ron's buddy.
You mentioned to me that he was interested in hypnotism and would do hypnotism tricks. Can you tell me about that?
Well, we have what is called the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society. It's had 3,000 meetings by now every Thursday night since 1934. And one of those evenings, I believe it was during World War II, I was still in uniform, and Ron Hubbard came to our club, and he hypnotized all of the members except me. I wanted to remain in present time and watch what was going on. And I remember it was fascinating. He told one boy that he had a little kangaroo in the palm of his hands, and the boy was going all around showing everybody his little kangaroo that was hopping around. Then he told this youngster, he said, I'll bring you up to present time, and if I just scratch the tip of my nose, you'll go instantly asleep. Well, I was standing behind the boy, and everybody...
Like I was saying, so he's hypnotizing all those science fiction writers there at their club there in Los Angeles, and apparently skilled at it, according to Forrest Ackerman, his buddy there, and ringleader of that club. And one point in time, a Scientologist, and apparently by his own admission, one point in time, a member of the Agape Lodge of the OTO. So before we get in specifically to that Agape Lodge and old Marvel Jack Parsons, let's also check out this hypnosis thing in Charles Manson. Folks of the interwebs, if you're familiar with the actor from the film, lots of films, basically any film that his cousin Robert Rodriguez directs, Quentin Tarantino's buddy, a lot of Scientology stuff around those two. But the film Machete, starring Danny Trejo. So Danny Trejo is probably that's at least the first film that comes to my mind when I think Danny Trejo. I think Machete, but pretty well known, recognizable actor. But here he is talking about the time he spent in jail with Charles Manson, and how Manson, they didn't have drugs in jail, obviously. Well, not obviously, but according to Trejo here, they didn't have drugs. But old Charles Manson was able to hypnotize them into a state where they thought they were high from some pot or dope, as heroin, as Trejo explains.
So you met Charles Manson in prison, didn't you? What was that story? Can you tell us that?
In the county jail. But let me tell you, Charlie wasn't the guy that you saw on the TV specials. All right, he was he was like 5'4", 5'5", little scrawny. He was poor, kind of like a bum, really. He had a a string for a belt. He tied his pants with a string because he couldn't afford a belt, you know, and everybody else, we dressed, you know, cool, ironed our pants, and so some of the prisoners were going to take advantage of him because they take advantage of anybody that's small, and we found out that he could hypnotize you, so we let him sleep in front of our cell to you know, to make sure that nobody would hurt him, and he got us loaded on weed.
Nope, I cut it off. He said, got us loaded on weed and got us loaded on dope. So apparently, these hypnotic abilities of Manson and perhaps even folks like L. Ron and his kangaroo tricks, maybe they can convince folks that they're high on drugs, right? So I think that's interesting. And again, these are the folks that I think that's a common skill set across these folks, be it the Paul Linebarger psychological operations for the U.S. Army, and to that, or to the hypnotic ability or hypnosis abilities here of L. Ron and other such cult members of these varieties, right? These Thelemic varieties, like Charles Manson. One note on Linebarger and his abilities of psychological operations. If any folks of the interwebs are familiar with the tale of the of how the U.S. tried to get, or was able to succeed in getting the islands down there in the South Pacific from Japan and, you know, the Philippines, whatnot, everywhere down there, to, you know, lay down their guns because they were going to, you know, give the guns to the women and the children. So, you know, the solution was not to go invade there and just fight women and children. So Paul Linebarger, again, the guy who wrote the manual in World War II on psychological operations for the U.S. Army, he came up with a campaign to drop these flyers and, you know, tell folks the war's over and convince folks, you know, on these flyers to, you know, put down their arms. And apparently in large part that was successful. You know, and I say in large part, there was obviously instances where it wasn't. And one of those instances was a fellow who was living in the woods in the jungles of the Philippines for the next 30 or 35 years or so after the war. He never got the Linebarger memo. He didn't realize the war was over and he was just hiding out still. So, you know, these things, you know, if you get the memo, they're successful, but in that guy's case, not so much. But so let's go on to talk about the rest of these folks who were Marvel Whiteside Jack Parsons, the man, the myth, the legend, the fellow who invented solid state rocket fuel, not a chemist, not formally trained. He was, in fact, as he would point out, an alchemist and a magician. And as you can see here, as he's pictured here with his groundbreaking Suicide Squad that tested early rockets. So this tale, I believe, is often described, at least in some narratives, in that TV show from about circa 10 years ago. I think it was on CBS, called Strange Angel. Okay, well, maybe we'll call it 7 years ago. Strange Angel. So, you know, I didn't see it, but my understanding is that it went through the you know, the Love, Sex, and Rockets version, right, of how he created you know, rocket fuel, right? I mean, I guess it does mention Corelli and some of the occultism, but I don't know how deep it goes in there. Anyhow, this is him, Suicide Squad, Ghislaine Maxwell's brother-in-law, disregard. Ghislaine Maxwell's brother-in-law, I believe his name is Roger Molina. His father, Frank Molina, is pictured here next to Parsons. That was his number 2 guy there in the Suicide Squad. So my understanding, they're doing, according to Parsons' statements and admissions, they're doing, you know, he's not a chemist. They're inventing this rocket fuel through magic. So apparently he's doing this rocket fuel ceremonial magic by day, the ritual sex magic stuff by night. He's a real Dr. Jekyll kind of Mr. Hyde type of character, right? So, and again, he joins the Agape Lodge, and I believe it's, before I just start making up dates here, let me just look here. I believe it was 1939. So the Agape Lodge is founded, the Ordo Templi Orientis, founded in 1935 by Wilfred Talbot Smith. And I believe it's 1930. Well, I believe it'll tell us here. Yeah. So the lodge experienced growth in 1939 with the initiation of Jack Parsons, a jet fuel engineer. So it seems that summer of 39 seems like an important time frame regarding the onset of Marvel Comics, the reconfiguration of that sci-fi writers club I was describing, the Los Angeles Science Fiction or Science Fantasy Society. So this was that club that Forrest Ackerman was referencing, that L. Ron Hubbard had hypnotized came into a meeting there, hypnotized everyone, and, well, with the exception of Ackerman. He wanted to stay of this world, he said, right? And, these were the same folks that Ackerman was describing. Well, we were all, they were all doing the thing that Hubbard was doing there, which was, again, the agape. But when were they starting to do that, right? Because, again, he meets Hubbard in 38, and there's that period from 38 to, late 41, where seemingly that these gents are running around Los Angeles together, right? That's his new literary agent. He's, Ackerman goes on to describe that Hubbard's always borrowing money from him back then, so they knew each other. These folks often say we don't know each other. Well, they knew each other. So I often wonder what was going on there at the Agape Lodge in 39, because Hubbard allegedly doesn't join there until 45, after the war, right? After he gets back from the war, but that's the story, right? But as you can see that in that clip from Ackerman, they're both in uniform. He said, Ackerman said it was during the war still. So again, I think there's a lot to be said about this narrative around this group here, and the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, and the actions of Ackerman there regarding just when did they join the OTO, right? Just when did L. Ron and gang join the OTO, and what was really going on there. So, and I point out those kind of seemingly disparate elements of that, what is accepted as the narrative, to ask those questions as well, because we're told that, I think one of the many accepted narratives is that L. Ron joins in 45, and then in 47, I believe it is, runs off with what is described as Jack Parsons' wife, right? Right. That's the narrative, but it's really his wife's sister. So, again, this is a ritual sex magic cult. So I don't know how much marriages really matter. Scientology, they don't really seem to matter a whole lot, and it doesn't seem like they're mattering a whole lot here. So I mean, and plus they're all just banging each other, I feel like. So just by what it seems like, given these the way things departed here. So the narrative goes that he runs off with Parsons' wife or girlfriend, right? Sarah Northrup. Well, Sarah Northrup was really the sister-in-law of Parsons. She was in a long-term relationship with Jack Parsons. Don't get me wrong, folks of the interwebs. These folks were definitely banging each other, according to all records, diaries, and journals and whatnot. But Sarah Northrup's sister was married to Parsons. That was actually Helen Parsons Smith. So that's what I'm saying, as far as how these narratives get described in our modern era, and they don't get described accurately, right? So Helen Parsons Smith was the sister, born Mary Helen Northrup, the sister of Sarah Northrup. Now, again, Parsons was married to this lady, and then, apparently, as the record goes, and then, he's apparently banging out her sister, right? Who then Hubbard joins in that weird mix of whatever the fuck's going on there, whatever the weird sexual activity is going on there. And then he runs off with Sarah Northrup, right? And apparently Parsons' money, right? Which is interesting, because right around that same time is when his wife, I believe, departs ways as well with the fellow that started the Agape Lodge, that Wilfred Talbot Smith. So again, what I'm getting at is, not to get lost in all these details, folks of the interwebs, what I'm getting at here is, though, these things are often misdescribed. And I think they're misdescribed intentionally at the early onset of these OTO activities. The Agape Lodge, who was not banging, and who was not running off with one another. So Helen Parsons Smith, according to this record here on Wikipedia, the source of all information on the interwebs, she divorces Parsons in 46. So, this is in around that same time, right? And again, Parsons Smith was the sister of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard's wife, Sarah Northrup Hollister. Sarah Northrup, and then some point in time, Hubbard, and who wants to keep that name? So she apparently remarried in Hollister. So, again, so back to what I'm describing is what they claim is the early onset of these activities around Marvel, when these folks joined the Agape Lodge, whatever the fuck went on there with who's banging who and who married who and whatever else happened. I don't know. Because after, what I'm saying is that it seems like all of these activities surround the actions and activities of Forrest J. Ackerman and friends, notably L. Ron Hubbard, right? He seems to be the central character in a lot of that storyline. Now, one other, after Parsons was married to her, and I believe it's after, or before, it's before Elron runs off with his sister-in-law lady there, Northrop. You know, they have this other lady in the mix there in their little sex cult, right? Marjorie Cameron, right? So, and she's apparently, she's Jack Parsons, I don't know, main side piece. I don't know how you describe these things, but they entered into a relationship and were married in 1946. So they were married, I believe, until Parsons' death. So she comes in after Helen Parsons, Helen Northrop Parsons ran off with the founder of the Agape Lodge, right? So again, these are narratives that are not necessarily described. They certainly weren't in that Strange Angel CBS TV show, I can tell you that much. But, you know, Marjorie Cameron, I think is worthy of noting that she had an interesting past. So she came in for those Babylon working sex magic rituals, right? They were married in 46. Hubbard dies in an explosion allegedly in 52. So probably a lot to be said about that. But anyway, after his death, she moves to Riverside County, California, right? Which is also home to the operational headquarters the administrative headquarters for Scientology, Gold Base. They're located just outside of Hemet, California, in Riverside County, not far from the Cabazon Indian Ranch of Octopus fame and Danny Casolaro Promise software business, Michael Riconosciuto stuff. But nonetheless, so she goes down there and starts a new cult, calling it the Children, you know, doing other sex magic ritual Thelemic business. And that's probably a different tale altogether here, folks. I just want to point out that she's got a very interesting kind of background here as we get further here and seeing where she came from. So she, not only was she a Navy, she served time in the Navy, I believe, here during World War II, but I believe she served time for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So her service in World War II consisted of, she served as a cartographer for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. In the course of those duties, she met UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill in May of 1943. Side note, Winston Churchill, member of the Society of the Cincinnati. You may think that's way off topic. However, when we're talking Jack Parsons and looking at his history, whoa, it's not that far off topic, because it seems that Parsons also hails from a Revolutionary War officer in the wars of 1776, out of Massachusetts, which would have ostensibly permitted that man to be a member of the Society of Cincinnati as an officer in Washington's army, and that membership gets passed down through the paternal bloodlines, and it's very possible that Mr. Jack Parsons himself could have been a hereditary member of the Society of the Cincinnati. It's also important to note that his foremother was accused of being a witch in the Salem witch trials. That would have been the mother, that would have been the grandmother of the Revolutionary War officer. She was acquitted apparently, but accused. And his forefather there, Parsons, I believe, was a religious man there in Essex County, Massachusetts, Salem. So interesting past that Parsons. So when this Cameron lady's meeting other folks, I just think it's not that far off topic. But anyhow, so she has an interesting past doing naval stuff, Joint Chiefs of Staff stuff. She gets shit coded apparently, saying she went AWOL, locked up for the remainder of her enlistment, and then after that enlistment, ta-da, she's at Jet Propulsion Laboratories, because that's where her dad and brother went to go work apparently, and that's where Parsons is founded Jet Propulsion Laboratories, right? So then she meets Parsons and does all this occult stuff as the story goes. But they all have this interesting past. It's very Laurel Canyon, weird scenes inside the canyon style past, right? That's a seems to be a very common trend here amongst this business. And before I go any further in this tale here tonight, folks, I will let's take a quick break here. We'll jump back into Parsons, and I got a brief intermission for us all here.
I can go to your mama's and start a small fire in her panties. Now, are you ready to get out of the car?
No, sir. Come on. You know what? That was my fault, and I'm really sorry. Here, I got something for you. It's kind of a souvenir. Oh, here it is. Yeah!
All right, folks. And brief intermission. I like to include that this evening because didn't realize it until I began looking at a large volume of old Getty and AP images of old legendary Cocaine Bob there. He has a lot of photographs with Gary Busey. So I can only imagine. I don't even think I can imagine, actually. I don't think I can imagine the volume of cocaine that would have been ingested between whenever those two hung out. So, you know, it's not just one time. It seemed like the further I looked, there's a lot of photos between those two. I thought it was just maybe one time, but yeah, they apparently go way back. So I'm not sure when, but didn't start there in 2003 at the Kid Notorious premiere. It definitely goes back further, but that's a Busey classic from Black Sheep, David Spade and Chris Farley. So back in this Parsons thing in Marvel Comics, and you know, Marvel being a tribute to Jack Parsons, right? You know, at least that idea, right? Let's see here. Oh, there it is. So this is obviously a Photoshop, right? You know, this is not, I didn't make this Photoshop. I think it's funny, right? Because it kind of emphasizes my point here. So that's Jack Parsons and Marjorie Cameron, right? So this is after 46, but before 52 when he allegedly blowed up. And she went to, you know, she went back near Gold Base down there in Riverside and set up shop with her new cult right by Scientology administrative HQ. Which I'd like to see now when they set up that property in Hemet, because I don't think they set up that property in Hemet till years later. So that'd be interesting to see why, maybe to see the cult activity in and around Hemet, Riverside, California, with folks like Marjorie Cameron, who obviously L. Ron knew. I mean, he probably knew her on like a more of a biblical level, it sounds like, but you know, they're in a sex cult, but you know, they definitely knew each other, right? So it's interesting that she would set up shop down there, you know, and then he would make that a headquarters later. So perhaps more to unpack in the future, but right now, this is a photo of the lovely married couple, the Parsons, Jack and Marjorie Cameron Parsons there, Marvel Jack Parsons, that is. So I think it's, when I was saying before that he's got like this ceremonial magic rocket fuel during the day, and then he's got the ritual Babylon working sex magic at night. And that's how he met this lady in the first place, was he apparently did a ritual to summon the whore of Babylon or some nonsense. I don't know. But the idea that he's doing this wizardry by day and wizardry by night, I think, is an interesting concept in regards to the Marvel Comics narrative, right? So, I lost it. There we go. So you got that dude there, daytime Jack, you know, nighttime Jack, maybe, right? And then I just think when you look at the folks that some of the characters in Marvel Comics, right, to see, you know, is that the only representation, right? Is it just the name Marvel Comics, or is it just the name Suicide Squad, right, from DC Comics, or is there other circumstantial factors or indicators that might cause one to suspect that there's more to this tale, right, with this whole Origins of the Marvel story? And I do think that there are a couple characters in which Parsons is indeed memorialized by, I guess, right? They pay tribute to him, I suppose, is a better way to put it. And one of those characters is the character who's kind of like the godfather of a lot of the Marvel universe, right? The Howard Stark character. So Tony Stark, Iron Man, right? Which Iron Man, and they've mashed together so many characters that Flying Fella's now Captain America. And I think at one point in time, there was a different Iron Man. Maybe he's an Iron Man now, and they're an Iron Man. It's probably going to be a transgendered Iron Man coming soon. Who knows? But I do think that in large part, the character of Howard Stark, this guy who's at the forefront of creating, again, so Captain America, right? You know, he's Tony Stark's dad. There's just he kind of plays this scientific wizard dude, right? And again, he bears a strong resemblance to old Marvel Parsons there, doesn't he? And this is from one of the recent films, but that's the younger comic book version. That's a strong, they strongly captured the comic book younger version of Howard Stark, because there's an older version of Howard Stark, but old Marvel Parsons blew himself up in 52, so we don't have an older version of Marvel Parsons. So I do think those two look familiar, and I think his nighttime character, because I was showing this photo, kind of bears, in my opinion, again, I didn't make this, but in my opinion, it bears a resemblance to Doctor Strange. So I think Doctor Strange might be that Babylon working kind of nighttime Jack Parsons type of character, right? With the like I said, ceremonial rocket fuel by day, and then magical sex magic Babylon working stuff by night, whatever else they were doing. I just I do think that there's something to be said that some of the depictions of Doctor Strange strikingly look a lot like old Parsons there. And they're gonna pay tribute to the man in name and in Suicide Squad nickname of his team there. I would expect them to pay further tributes, right? To I'm not going to say he's their god, but I mean a figurehead in some regard, right? I mean, he was he's kind of the main Thelemic dude, or considered the main follower of Crowley here in America. So obviously that's a point of contention, and folks are always saying, "Oh, I was there first," or I'm the top dude, but I mean he was up there, right? So I mean, I don't know. I have to assume in that regard, again, he didn't start the Agape Lodge, but somehow, it was floundering, and then his wife would run off with the guy that found it later. But, he seems to have taken it over from when that dude ran off with his wife, and L. ran off with his side piece, and then he got Marjorie Cameron in the mix. I guess that was before L. ran off. But nonetheless, there's just a lot of weird sexual magic ritual cult nonsense going on there. But it seems like, despite Parsons getting the short end of those deals, it seems like what I'm saying is he did appear to be a figurehead amongst this crowd, right? I mean, he's often, again, it's his lodge, even though he didn't start it, but it's often considered Parsons Agape Lodge, but he's not the founder of it, right? So, if in that regard, I just think there's going to be some veneration there of the man. Again, it doesn't seem maybe not on its face, because they're like, well, everyone took his ladies and his money, and then they blew him up. But that doesn't mean there's not some veneration there still. Maybe some folks don't like him; they want to get rid of him. But maybe other folks were like, you know what, we really like this Parsons fella. So on top of those things, though, right? So on top of those aspects, I think another thing that can be exhibited here across this this cult network, if I'm trying to lay down my circumstantial argument here on whether or not Marvel and DC Comics is Thelemic fan fiction, and I guess I could have done a better job of describing the idea of fan fiction at the beginning of this here discussion here, folks, but now's a better time than any, I guess. So when I say fan fiction, and it's not a one-for-one swap, it's not like everything in Thelema would be seen in Marvel or DC Comics, but it's matters that you'll see tributes to, and namesake, and character attributes, be it Xenu or Thanos, or the ability of having superpowers or not, right? Scientology or Marvel or DC superpowers, right? It's these general concepts that are seen in fan fiction of a subject, and one example I offer in that regard, if two seemingly disparate pieces of fiction, that one began as fan fiction for the other. So I'm sure folks are familiar with Twilight, that tweeny, really weird vampire werewolf stuff from the mid-aughts. The new Batman fella, speaking of DC Comics, the new Batman fella, Robert Patterson, he was a vampire. Now he's a vampire again, kind of. He's half man, half vampire, right? Batman. Not really like Spider-Man style, but he's LARPing as a bat, right? So he's kind of like a vampire-esque creature, right? Maybe he likes to do vampire stuff. I don't know. Nonetheless, you have the Twilight series. Again, this sounds strange, but if anyone's familiar with 50 Shades of Grey nonsense, that whole saga, 50 Shades of Grey, that started as a Twilight fan fiction blog and then evolved into whatever rape fantasies that was about. I'm not sure, but it started as a Twilight fan fiction blog. I'm not sure how you go from werewolves and vampires to rape stuff, but I didn't read it, nor did I write it. So I'm just describing that I can't precisely point out to you folks of the interwebs the precise correlations. I just know that that's the origin of that film that was started as a Twilight fan fiction blog. Don't ask me how I know it. Couldn't tell you. Sifting around through the malted hops and bong resin in my brain hole, that one just popped in there. So anyway, fan fiction isn't exactly a 1-for-1 swap, but it will there will be correlations. And again, I offer much in the namesake and perhaps even the character basis through old Marvel Jack Parsons there. The origin story of all of these activities around the Agape Lodge, Forrest J. Ackerman, L. Ron Hubbard and gang, right? And again, the characteristics we see in the philosophies of Scientology and their aspects of these same aspects of fan fiction, right? The Thelemic fan fiction. By one of the most prolific sci-fi writers and his buddy, the guy that coined the term sci-fi, Forrest Ackerman. So it's an interesting epicenter of activity again when you realize that Ackerman's involved from moment one with DC Comics as well, right? It's not just Marvel, right? So something to be said there about them years between 38 and 41 when them boys were probably doing a lot of weird cult activity there that we're just we don't have the full story on, right? It didn't just happen in 45 and 40 to 47. It seemingly started much earlier around the same crowd of folks. So, and again, not only is it the Ancient Alien Cargo Cult stuff and the fan fiction business here, these folks that Forrest Ackerman represented, they brought us a lot of the ideas of space. Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov. Not only did these folks narrate the Apollo 11 moon launch. There we go. Got tripped up there for a second. I found it. Apollo 11 moon launch, July 16th, 1969. You could watch, I believe, on 2 channels live, and you either had you had your newscaster or whatever on both channels, and then opposite your newscaster, you had your color commentary man for this, man's mission to the moon, and that was Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. Not only are they seemingly prolific kid diddlers, when I say that, to the point where Clarke got banished to an entire island. They're like, in a land of the United Kingdom with folks like Jimmy Savile, the royal family, Clement Freud. They said, Arthur C. Clarke, you know what, buddy, you done diddled too many kids. You're going to Sri Lanka. It's not just pointing that out. It's a large volume of diddling. So Isaac Asimov, I don't have any precise references for the diddling outside of Isaac Asimov Jr., the man who inherited his father's entire wealth, was busted for the largest child pornography stash in American history. Did no time in prison, though. Rest assured, folks of the interwebs, he did 0 time in prison. You can thank former FBI director, previous to that, U.S. attorney for the district in San Francisco, Robert Mueller, who at the time there in San Francisco let Isaac Asimov Jr. walk. So, a lot to be said about that, because it seems like the folks that invent space here with all these ancient alien cargo cult narratives around these pulp fiction stuff, L. Ron and gang, these cultists, they all seem to do a lot of kid stuff. I would argue that's rooted in their religion of Thelema, but, what do I know? The kid stuff, that is. And I'm sure it gets taken to an extreme by other parties, but I'm saying that it's root cause or root impetus of whatever's going on there. It's, seemingly rooted in the rituals and protocols of Aleister Crowley and his Thelema. So, and again, these are all Thelema offshoots, so why wouldn't it be? So nonetheless, it's Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, again, the literary agents, and Forrest J. Ackerman, they're in the Sci-Fi Writers Club. So were they part of the OTO, and did they do some Scientology stuff? Because, Scientology was big over there in the UK. I mean, L. Ron lived in a castle over there for many years. And, in fact, that's where the process began, right? So that was out of London during his time there in the early 60s. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said with these, all these, just because they live over in the UK like Clark. I mean, he's part of the same crew with the same agents, probably doing the same stuff, it sounds like. But I think one of those, as far as doing the same stuff or doing the new thing, right? I think one thing that can be said is about all of this stuff is it can be relative to Marvel and DC Comics, right? And this Thelemic fan fiction. I think part of that argument, outside of what I've already described here, folks, and can be seen in exhibited by the actors and actresses who star in these films, right? These big budget, you know, Hollywood, you know, films that Marvel and DC comic books that seem to have a large cultural impact on our society. And the first character that comes to mind in that regard is none other than a man I've spoke about here a lot on Operation GCD a number of times, and the cult that he financed and was associated with, and largely financed through the film series Blade and his Amun-Ra production studios. That is actor Wesley Snipes. So he was he directly a Thelemite? Well, you know, I don't know. I mean, he was a member of the Nuwaubian Nation. Now, the Nuwaubian Nation's an interesting group, as they, much like Crowley or Hubbard or Aquino or any one of these folks, they seem to mash together a bunch of occult principles and protocols and procedures and rituals and do them in their own variety and style and call it their own religion. So that's kind of what Dwight York did. So the leader of the Nuwaubian Nation, who sits in Florence Supermax prison for the next, I don't know, circa the next 120 years, maybe. He was the cult leader of the Nuwaubian Nation. He got busted in 2002. Snipes was referenced as one of the Nuwaubian millionaires. Hold on. Nuwaubian millionaires, quote unquote, as cited by the PR rep back in 2000 in a Georgia publication here. Because they left New York in the 90s here, where they grew out of, and where Dwight York essentially started hip hop with his artists that he produced, such as Africa Bambaataa, and much of hip hop venerates. Speaking of venerating and paying tribute, much of the hip hop community today pays tribute and venerates old Dwight York here, aka Malachi Z. You know, aka Dr. York. So again, he's in Florence Supermax prison doing a lot of diddling stuff, some racketeering, some pedophilia, rape, that kind of thing, tax fraud, conspiracy. Now, they couldn't get old Wesley there for the same charges, but if you see, they got him from 1999 to 2004. The actor Wesley Snipes earned $38 million, blah, 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 for the movie series Blade. They got him for the money for those films, right? For the tax evasion. So he didn't pay taxes on those films, because part of the Nuwaubian Nation is they're sovereign citizens. So they left New York. They bought a 400-acre plot of land in Georgia. And again, this is part of that whole Nuwaubian millionaires that the PR rep cited to the local media as financing this operation of building this 400-acre land, right? And he's not the only one. Again, a lot of music, a lot of musicians, a lot of hip hop folks involved in this. Not the least of which is Outkast. And Jay-Z had his first music video. Well, the first music video he appeared in was there. But nonetheless, back to Marvel and old Mr. Snipes here. So they got him for the tax evasion at the same time they got York for all the other stuff, the kid stuff. Apparently, whatever reason, they couldn't get Snipes on it, so they got him for the Al Capone prosecution, right? But prior to that, he was, you know, again, Amun-Ra Productions was his film production studio. He made this Blade series with. Again, it was Blade's for those folks who weren't familiar, because it is a vampire, not necessarily, you know, readily recognizable as a Marvel series, but it is a Marvel story. So this is a man that the folks who are making Marvel films now, such as the recent Deadpool with Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds, they actually pay tributes. Once again, paying tribute and veneration. They pay tribute to Wesley Snipes for starting this this new trend and effort in Hollywood in which to make these big budget, you know, action and kind of, you know, R-rated style, you know, films, right, based on the Marvel comics, right? So they even have in their little I ain't seen it, but they even have their little multiverse apparently in the new Deadpool with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. alongside Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. There, they have Wesley Snipes reprising his role as Blade apparently in a sequence or two. So he makes an appearance, and again they pay tribute and venerate old Snipes there. So that compound they built down there, huge compound built on mounds. They were an ancient alien cargo cult built on mounds, and they did a bunch of ancient Egyptian stuff. And again, Snipes used that money. Again, much like Jurassic Park, they didn't really spare many expenses here. So huge compound. We got a couple pyramids. We got a Sphinx. We even more pyramids than I can count. Apparently, they got a couple big ones. Again, this is built on a mound complex on a 400-acre plot of land. And then right when they were getting busted up there in the early aughts, this was the city of Tamaray, they called it. It's since been destroyed. But we go look here at the early aughts. When they got busted up, Snipes was trying to buy the adjacent property, another 300 acres, to build a training camp for his security. He owned a security guard company through Amun-Ra Productions. Amun-Ra Productions was trying to purchase this property, and eventually got denied from zoning issues by the county. The county, there's a lot of stuff going on between this cult and the county and the government down there. Quite a war, if you will, but over the years. But they boxed him out by doing that. But it was his Amun-Ra Productions that was trying to buy that property, and it was his Amun-Ra Productions that owned the security force that they planned on training more of at that property. But they were the security force for the compound across the street, the one we were just looking at, the city of Tamaray. So it's funny because there's a paper trail behind all of this. And again, there's an early reference as Snipes being a Nuwaubian, quote unquote, Nuwaubian millionaire by the cult's PR rep. But there's a lot of records that claim Wesley Snipes was never part of the Nuwaubian nation. But, again, the record states otherwise. And again, right here, even in this headline from the Macon Telegraph back in May of 2000, when a lot of this stuff was popping off down there. Again, they moved down there in late 90s, but this was all the early 2000s. This was all their buildup, right? Actors Amun-Ra Films is interested in Putnam land adjacent to Nuwaubians. So, like I said, they were trying to buy that security compound across the street, but they were like, no, wait. We're not associated with those folks across the road, though. We're doing our own thing. Even though the folks across the road were doing their own thing, right? Was the security force for the Nuwaubians at Tamaray. So again, it's all preposterous, but what do you expect with a bunch of Ancient Alien Cargo Cultists, right? Who do a bunch of kid diddling stuff, right? Back to this Arthur C. Clarke, back to the Isaac Asimov stuff around these things. A lot of kid stuff. Sadly. So that's what I was saying. You can kind of look at the actions and activities of the folks who perpetrate these ideas today and be like, well, kind of doing the same stuff. Weird cult stuff, weird kid stuff, weird ritual magic stuff, right? It's all around the same stuff. So that's kind of what I would expect for actors in a Thelemic fan fiction series, right? In Hollywood big budget films, I would expect those actors in the Thelemic fan fiction series to themselves be involved in weird cult stuff. And on top of that, be involved in weird kid stuff. And again, it's not just these big budget films, because we have the TV show Smallville from the CW, which was apparently a subsidiary of the Nexium cult at some point, it seems, right? I mean, a lot of Nexium activity going on there. Multiple cast members, that have admitted it and undocumented, right? But makes you wonder who else on there was a Nexium member, right? And for example, the fellow that played Lex Luthor on that show, I believe his name's something Rosenbaum, maybe Michael Rosenbaum. Kind of didn't do much as an actor after that film. I think he has a couple flops in Hollywood, that kind of thing. But he was largely out of the scene for about 8 or 9 years, and then just a couple years ago, a few years back now, suddenly Michael Rosenbaum pops out on the scene. He's like, to do a press tour, podcast, media, everything, telling everybody that his friend Kevin Spacey's a really nice guy. That he met Kevin Spacey smoking pot in Kevin Spacey's trailer on the set of a film back when he was 15 years old. That sounds about right, Michael. That sounds about right. That sounds right up Spacey's. That's right in Spacey's wheelhouse right there. So, and then he goes on to describe nothing weird happened, and that rest assured, Kevin Spacey's a nice guy. So The guy came out of Oblivion from the Nexium show to tell everyone that Kevin Spacey's a nice guy. This is the guy that played Lex Luthor in the TV show, the prequel storyline of Superman there, you know, Forrest Ackerman's buddies who created Superman. And then lo and behold, you know, years after that, you know, well, I suppose really fairly contemporary to Smallville, I suppose, right? Kevin Spacey plays Lex Luthor himself in one of the versions of Superman there. Big budget Hollywood film, right? So, you know, and I don't know that we need to take a detour into the life and times of one Kevin Spacey, but certainly possibly a topic in the future because he, you know, once you do all the crazy wacko Looney Tunes nonsense that man's done involved in the large scale, you know, seemingly diddling a lot of kids in England and America. It seems like boys, that is, younger boys, circa the age of 15, like old Rosenbaum there from Smallville. And you know, that's when he first met him, right? Smoking pot in Spacey's RV trailer. Great guy, that Spacey, according to Rosenbaum. But yeah, it makes you wonder because again, it's the same activities, right? Weird diddling stuff. The actors who star in these seemingly Thelemic fan fiction, big budget Hollywood films, and even the low budget, small budget, I don't know, some budget CW TV incarnations of these storylines, right? With I keep calling him Michael Rosenbaum. I suppose I could just look his name up, but it's kind of fun just not. It's called Phil Rosenbaum. Oh, it is Michael Rosenbaum. Holy shit. Terrible with names. Surprised I guessed that. Anyhow, it is odd though, you know. So looking at how these actors are today, I think, and their activities and actions, again, not just Wesley Snipes here, not just Michael Rosenbaum, Lex Luthor, or Kevin Spacey, Lex Luthor, or whatever the fuck went on in that RV trailer when Rosenbaum was 15, smoking pot with Spacey. Because I've seen some of the court records from England, the cases they settled out of that playhouse that Spacey was managing. Not good. The point being here, though, is a lot of weird activity around these things. And again, these ideas and these cults, they permeate our culture more ways than I think folks realize. And when you're talking Snipes, the New Wabian Nation, you might be thinking, well, there's not a direct connection to Scientology and Elron, is there? And if you thought that, you'd be wrong, I think, folks. So, like I was saying, one of the other New Wabian millionaires was the hip hop band Outkast. They actually sing about York in their songs. They're different than Jay-Z does. And, you know, and York's underling, Africa Boombata, who's venerated in a lot of songs. And Boombata, he himself, cult, and he started his own cult and got his own diddle and stuff. So, you know, just like his mentor York, I suppose. But these are the folks that started hip hop, York and Boombata. They're attributed to those things. But 2004, CBS apologizes for Outkast's performance at the Grammys. CBS apologizes Friday to American Indians angered by Outkast's Grammy Awards performance. We are very sorry if anyone was offended. So, blah, 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 blah. And the reason why they're apologizing about stuff is because Outkast went full New Wabian. You never go full New Wabian, especially at the Grammys. So they went full New Wabian on everyone. And like I said, these cults these ancient alien cargo cults, they seem to like to get along. You know, what's the connection? Besides, what's the connection between the Nation of Islam, which the New Wabians were more or less an offshoot of, and Scientology? Well, the Nation of Islam today are Scientologists. Louis Farrakhan signed the entire Nation of Islam up for Scientology a number of years back, I believe, courtesy of Leah Remini, and you know. Obviously, some ancient alien cargo cult stuff in between those two, right? Even though one's kind of very black nationalist and one's kind of very white nationalist. They both have some, you know, astrotheological concepts they share, obviously. But suppose Louis Farrakhan probably did that in a capitalistic move because once he signed everyone up for Scientology, he got 10% of all of the Nation of Islam. Whatever they spent in Scientology, they were all in his downstream. It's a multi-level marketing scheme, right? In one aspect. So they're all in his downstream. So he got 10% of everything they spent. So that's probably a few new Rolls Royces for old Farrakhan. So a couple of them alligator shoes, maybe some shiny suits. Anyhow, but the New Wabian Nation and Scientology clearly have some crossover as well. And you don't have to take my word for it. We'll just listen to Outkast's 2004 Grammy performance.
Fellow countrymen, It is the year 2999, the eve of the year 3000. Mother Earth is dying. Her hills and the valley, once filled with the beauteous sounds, now lay fallow and silent. Music has lost its muse. There's no singing, no dancing, no smiling, no individual styling, but there is hope. From across the universe, a rebel band of outcasts has arrived, bringing with them the hopes and dreams of a new generation. A generation imbued with the spirit of song and the true rhythm of life. One can only hope that their arrival will signal the dawn.
The natives are definitely restless.
1, 2, 3. My baby don't mess around because she loves me so, and this I know for sure.
I couldn't tell you the name of the song there, folks, but y'all know the jams. Sing along at home if you know the words. So that was the 2004 Outcasts, some song. I believe it was from their Atlians or ATLIENS. So ATLians, I suppose. Nothing Ancient Alien Cargo cool about that, is there? So you see at the beginning of that, you see, I'm obviously being facetious. You see Jack Black looking like an L. Ron Hubbard character, describing what sounds almost like an L. Ron Hubbard Pulp Fiction sci-fi story there, with years 3000s and all other nonsense, but looking a lot like a L. Ron Hubbard character. And speaking of venerations and paying tribute, if you don't think Jack Black's a Scientologist, you should go check out his Tenacious D lyrics, where he venerates and pays tribute to L. Ron Hubbard and Dianetics. So, just saying. Next on our list of Marvel and DC film actors, right, who exhibit these strange ritualistic cult behaviors, oftentimes surrounding diddling, right, that seem to replicate the behaviors of the folks who started this, right? Marvel Parsons and gang, right? Forrest Ackerman and crew, right? That is a fellow who's played, when you start, folks in the interwebs, when you start playing multiple different characters in multiple different films of DC and Marvel varieties, that's when my Kill Bill sirens start popping off my brain hole. So our next character qualifies in that department. There's a few characters that do. Ryan Reynolds, obviously, like I was saying before, Deadpool. He did Green Lantern. And he played Blade's sidekick in Blade #3. There we go. So he's done a number of Marvel films, playing a number of different characters. And it is our next, didn't add Ryan Reynolds to the list tonight. Perhaps a future show. Tonight, though, Jared Leto. Because we were talking Suicide Squad. Jack Parsons, right? And his team of quote-unquote rocket engineers who created solid-state rocket fuel through some sort of ceremonial magic and not chemistry, as per Parsons himself. Then you have DC Comics Suicide Squad starring this nutjob, this Looney Tunes bastard, Jared Leto. As depicted here, he has decided to start his own Jesus cult, I suppose. I don't know if he looks a lot like Mormon Jesus. I don't know if he's aiming for Mormon Jesus, but minus the sunglasses, if you walked into a Mormon church today, you'd see an image of an individual looking precisely like that. So it creeps me out that Leto's gone full-blown Mormon Jesus here, but rock and roll Mormon Jesus apparently. But yeah, he's got a full-blown cult going. And quite honestly, I'm just letting this simmer for a second. It's fucking creepy, but quite honestly, it's not even just, it's the cold. That's bad enough, right? But if you look at it, you look at what else he does. He also owns the infamous Lookout Mountain Movie Studios, aka the home of psychological warfare movie operations for decades, and then later one of those programming, deprogramming drug places, right? Like drug rehab centers, right? Creepy drug rehab centers, like Scientology and Arcanon style creepy. So famously weird actor. That's a great headline, SF Gate, whatever you are. famously weird actor owns secret Cold War military compound in Laurel in California. So this is the old movie studio at Lookout Mountain at the height of Laurel Canyon there. Weird scenes inside the canyon indeed when you're talking about Jared Leto here, because once again, like I said, he starred in multiple films, but notably he was the Joker in Suicide Squad. They didn't invite him back for any of the remakes and rehashes and reconfigurations of Suicide Squad through the multiple directors they decided, because if you recall, they made the Suicide Squad 2, and then that movie was really bad, worse than the first one. And then a couple years later, Warner Brothers was like, you know what? I have a great idea. You remember that film Suicide Squad? Let's make that movie again. And then they hired James Gunn, which, Kill Bill sirens again, because James Gunn is not only directed DC films, he directed a number of Marvel films, and now I believe he's the head of Marvel Studios. So you have a lot of weird stuff going on. If you want to talk about weird stuff in James Gunn, that is definitely going to be a conversation for a different day, folks. That dude's is just too much. It's just too much. And the least of which is his close associations with creepy dude who founded Troma Films, Lloyd Kaufman, who he and Lloyd Kaufman both make and used to enjoy making a lot of pedophile jokes on and around their Twixter accounts, oftentimes amongst one another publicly. Lloyd Kaufman also being a Skull and Bonesman as well, amongst the founder of Troma Films, which is, I'm not going to say I haven't enjoyed a Troma film, but they're fucking creepy. I mean, Redneck Zombies is still probably it's not one of my favorites, but I'll watch it. I'll watch it again, but they're not cinematic masterpieces. That's for damn sure. They're fucking weird too. Anyway, Jared Leto plays the Joker in the Suicide Squad. They didn't invite him back, but he also, if you folks recall, had another, that's a DC comic. He had a Marvel-based comic film that was also a major bust. That was Morbius. 2022 American superhero film Morbius. I think he does vampire stuff there. I didn't see it, so I couldn't tell you. I could read it. I also don't care. Jared Leto's a fucking Looney Tune. Back to the Joker and him being a Looney Tune. He wasn't allowed back for number 2 because they call it method acting, I guess. I call it being a Looney Tune, but Jared Leto terrified Suicide Squad co-stars with gruesome method acting techniques. So apparently, during the filming of the Suicide Squad, he never broke character. In fact, the one story that comes, quickly to my brain hole is the incident where Margot Robbie played Harley Quinn, right? His sidekick or whatever, right? So he sends Margot Robbie, not the character she's playing. He sends Margot Robbie a package or a delivery or package or whatever while on set. And it's like it's just a dead rabbit in a box. So he sends her a package as if he was the Joker, right? He just would never break character. And he was literally just going around set, creeping everyone out, right? Just creeping everyone out. So, he didn't get invited back for number 2, but they did slide him over to a different Marvel or DC film, right? With the Marvel film Morbius. And it also was a bomb. So why they keep giving creepy ass Jared Leto any roles, doing anything, I don't know. But back to that cult situation, Jared Leto is running a cult straight out of a true crime docuseries. I don't disagree with that title. I often disagree with a lot of titles, but I don't disagree with that title. I already showed you the picture. I'll leave some links in the show notes if folks want to get deeper into this they even call him rock and roll Messiah. I like it. Here we go. These people are talking my language. Rock and roll Mormon Jesus. They're calling it the ultimate roll. I don't know about that, but like I said, he's doing some heavy cult business. The propensity and activities surrounding anything diddling wise, well, I couldn't tell you, but I'm going to be honest with you folks of the interwebs. It's not a very good cult leader. He's not, it's not a sex cult. And he's not diddling stuff. I feel like that's what all cult leaders do. Isn't that part of being a cult leader? So something tells me old 30 Seconds to Mars here ain't a choir boy or nothing. You know what I mean? Mr. Rock and Roll Jesus. Again, he sent a dead rabbit to his co-star as if he was the Joker. And apparently it scared her half to death. Like, apparently she was very frightened from it. And he sent all the co-stars creepy gifts like that from the Joker, though, too. Like, I'm sure former / possibly still current Scientologist Will Smith on the set. Will Smith starred in that as well. I'm sure he got a creepy package. Lord knows what Leto, the Joker, sent that man, because dude's in some weird shit, if you ask me. Both of them. So, again, looking at the folks who star in these films today, and once again, I just pointed out Will Smith as another character who, once again, has some valid or some confirmed connections to Scientology. Right? I'm not just saying Will Smith was a Scientologist. I believe his wife has confirmed that publicly that she was, but claims he wasn't. But he had the so Scientology, L. Ron, they're real big about like contracts and the billion-year contracts with Xenu and stuff. But like they have their own charter school system, right? Because they don't, first of all, they don't like kids. Children are just old aliens in a young body, according to them, to the Scientologists, that is. So they have their own school system. I think it's called the Delphi Charter Schools or something. But Will Smith had a charter for one of those schools. That's where those Looney Tune children of his that speak fucking gibberish and clearly are fucking lost. They went to that school. So you can thank those children's intelligence on the education system of Scientology, apparently. But nonetheless, you don't get a charter from old L. Ron and gang without being a member. Just like it seems to me that you don't get your books don't go inside a Scientology library or org for sale in the official list, like Jim Mars. Another guy who's perpetrated a lot of ancient alien cargo cult ideas in our modern times with his books and whatnot. You don't get your books in there unless you're a member. And Jim Mars approved list of books there, sold Scientology stores. So I don't know. You tell me, because it seems like a lot of these folks, if not all of them, have all these folks pushing these ideas of aliens and whatnot, be it Jim Mars or Will Smith, and damn near every one of his movies, from Men in Black to you name it. Again, Suicide Squad, where he probably got some creepy gift or multiple creepy gifts, or who knows what that gift was, from Jared Leto, aka the Joker, who apparently creeped everybody out. So the next character up, if we're going to look at this Thelemic fan fiction idea, and the idea that these folks are part and parcel of the same system, if you will, with the creepy cult activity and, again, the diddling stuff, right? We look no further than the fella who almost didn't star in The Flash, right? The movie DC Comics film The Flash. They started him off there in the Batman, Superman stuff with the versus the Suicide Squad or whoever the fuck they're battling, but he was in a previous Avengers style setup, if you will, with I don't remember the name, but the actor's name is Ezra Miller. He played the Flash. The fellow with the red outfit. He runs real quick. So they, after production, they filmed that entire movie, the solo movie, The Flash. They filmed the entire production, and it was in post production. And this dude was just out doing hood rat shit. I mean, he started a cult in southern Vermont, which included an illegal grow operation, may or may not have included some prostitution. There was just a lot of comes and goings, like a hippie commune style. But the word prostitution was thrown out there. The claims were as some sort of brothel or whatnot, if you will. Then, not far from there, this is What's Going On with Ezra Miller, a look at the ongoing scandal. So this was August of 2022. They almost didn't release this movie, apparently. Again, this is big budget film for Warner Brothers. This is their star, and they not only they got to maintain his public image, because it was, look at him, wasn't going well. Then he started doing the cult stuff, and then he went to some neighborhood game night in some suburban area, I believe, of Springfield, Massachusetts. So not far from southern Vermont, but around this is around the same time. This is June of 2022. Protection order granted for 12-year-old against Ezra Miller after cult claims. So he finds himself in some capacity at this family game night in some suburbs and suburban Springfield, Massachusetts, right? So Western Mass. And obviously the folks there, I believe, from the stories and the protection orders, they were enamored with this Hollywood star coming to their film, because he'd been in other films before The Flash. And like I said, so they including he played the Flash again in films before the solo film The Flash. So they were kind of enamored by this guy, and apparently he was groping a 12-year-old, and her parents intervened. We're like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Her dad's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Grab my daughter, and then Ezra Miller puts a gun on the father. So dude goes to a game night that he's invited to from some like neighborhood game night in some neighborhood he doesn't live in and doesn't know these people. They just invite him there from some connection, right? He gropes a 12-year-old. The father intervenes. He then pulls a gun on the father. Now, I'm sure Warner Brothers paid them off handsomely, but what I'm saying is this dude's into some weird shit. You know what I mean? His biggest film of his career is coming out. It's in post-production, and he's in game nights in Massachusetts from taking a break from his cold up in Vermont, and groping 12-year-olds and pulling guns on the parents that intervene. So creepy stuff. So started doing a lot of other stuff. He broke into a couple of residences in Vermont. They were doing some like what the Manson family called creepy crawly. I think they called it creepy crawly stuff or creepy crawlies or something like that. It was a game they would play where they would try to go sneak around at night, break into houses and stuff like that, and just take random things and food or something like that, just for shits and giggles, right? Just train to be stealthy, right? So that's really what he like. If you took those concepts from what the Manson family was doing and their creepy crawly business that they spoke of and they would frequently do, that's what he was doing in southern Vermont. And him and his couple of his cult members got jammed up for some burglary stuff. Again, I think Warner Brothers, paid things off handsomely and shit went away. But, this strapping young gent right here was, destined to be a movie star, DC Comics Flash style until he started a cult, groped a 12-year-old, pulled a gun on her dad, and then burglarized a couple of places. So, and then may or may not have been running a brothel. But nonetheless, he looks like a totally normal fellow, right? Kind of guy that you wouldn't expect this type of behavior from. I believe it's gone. I think it's a they now. I don't think it's a he anymore. I think it's a they. I don't know. Transgenderism seems to track with the same cult crowd, if you ask me. But nonetheless, if you look at his activities, right? No different than Jared Leto's. No different than Wesley Snipes' crew there at the New Albion Nation, right? No different than them Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke fellas, right? That are all running around with L. Ron Hubbard and the science fiction fantasy land there club, and Forrest J. Ackerman is the ringleader and literary agent for these folks. I mean, once again, weird sex magic cult stuff. A lot of diddling stuff around these folks. And again, the ideas of this Thelemic fan fiction stuff of DC and Marvel Comics with the superpowers, the galactic overlords, the tributes everywhere here, right? Tributes and songs to Hubbard, tributes to Dwight York, right? Tributes to both, apparently, in that Grammys performance, perhaps with Jack Black and Outkast. It's also important to note that another close associate of Dwight York was George Clinton, Mr. Process Church P. Funkadelic himself, George Clinton. So, and that brings us back to the process, even, because once again, we had that on the image of tonight's cover art. Old Cocaine Bob meets Marvel Comics, Mr. Stan Lee, that is. And they go way back. And again, you got George Clinton in the process. You got Cocaine Bob in the process. And I forgot to mention this earlier, and it was shared by folk of the interwebs. I appreciate, as always, P. Thomas there on Twixter. Always shares notes and ideas there with me. I appreciate. And he reminded me here today, today when in the post of tonight's show, that the process actually wrote a letter to Stan Lee one time. So, some connections there, what that letter says, I think it's fairly benign. It's not like, let's go do cult stuff together, but, it's, obviously, I think what I'm trying to say is these people knew each other, right? What's often described as we don't even know each other. These people know each other. So, when you're talking about venerations, again, venerating Dwight York in the music, and again, possibly L. Ron Hubbard and Dwight York, and that Outkast Jack Black Grammys performance, you see this a lot of veneration. So when I'm saying that Marvel Whiteside Parsons, nicknamed Jack Parsons, was venerated or pay tribute to in both the name Marvel Comics and these named Suicide Squad for DC, all surrounding the activities of Forrest Ackerman, who appears to have been a member of the Agape OTO as early as 39 there with Parsons, perhaps. It seems that summer of 39 was an integral time in all of these narratives, the Marvel, the Agape Lodge, and Parsons and Ackerman. And Hubbard allegedly too, right? Because he met Ackerman in 38 there in Los Angeles. And, I don't trust these people and their stories they give you. And again, the narratives that we've been described of the Agape Lodge are demonstrably incorrect. Hubbard may have ran off with Parsons' girlfriend, but Parsons' girlfriend was his sister-in-law, and Parsons' wife runs off with the founder of the lodge, and then Parsons is married to Marjorie Cameron, and then Marjorie Cameron starts her own cult down in Riverside near what would later be Scientology headquarters, and a lot of Scientology, Thelemic, being a Thelemic offshoot, and Process being an offshoot of that. A lot of Scientology, Process, and Thelemic offshoot business here going on in around these narratives, around that Agape Lodge, and I just think there's a lot to be said about when Forrest Ackerman claims they were doing it. They were doing that thing, the Agape stuff, and then they were doing that thing, L. Ron's new thing. Just when were they doing that first thing though? Because the Scientology narrative is often rooted in disinformation and misinformation. The Process Church here, well, they ended in 1974. This is obviously a very easily demonstrated lie and outright falsehood, and I've demonstrated that here on Operation GCD. Previous shows folks should go check out. I've done with Dana Dudoff from Rotting Jewels on that precise topic, and she's done an excellent job in really documenting a lot of these aspects of the lies of the Process, as she uncovered some early UK incorporation documents from that organization. They would later claim they never called themselves the Process until 1970 or 1968. However, that's when they came to America. However, they had filed corporation paperwork years prior in the United Kingdom under a different name, corporation name, but in the corporate documents it says the first paragraph, this group is known as the Process. So a lot of false narratives around here. I simply saying here that with all this veneration and tribute of these things and these false narratives combined, that these onset of Marvel comics around Marvel Parsons, that is, and Forrest Ackerman and gang with L. Ron Hubbard, it seems like there's a lot more to be said there, especially when these same concepts are seen throughout the narratives, both the philosophies of specifically Scientology, but I would argue also pretty overtly through Thelema with that little green fucker or gray fucker, Lam, in the Book of the Law that Crowley based his entire Thelema on. So, a lot of alien stuff, pretty overtly, a lot of ancient alien cargo cult ideas here, ceremonial magic stuff again, with this bunch. And I think that once again goes back to the diddling, because again, Crowley seems to provide, seems to assert value in the use of children in his sex magic rituals. So within Thelema. So, the idea that these things have been misdescribed to us, I think seems pretty recognizable, that a lot of these things around these cults are misdescribed to us at the onset, whether or not they actually disbanded in 1974, when they started. But again, when we see the concepts of Scientology, the superpowers, the galactic overlords, the alien stuff, even throughout all of Thelema, even the Process had their overlord watchers. And I would argue the Church of Satan likely does too, with their Council of Nine, which seemingly seems coincide with the concepts that Timothy Wiley professes around their overlord watcher alien folks in space, and which sounds strikingly similar to the Council of Nine, which is the infamous Puharich alien seance in Maine there back in the early 50s with blue blood families, So these alien cargo cults, they often do come from those blue blood families, and I do think that a lot of this Thelemic modern Satanism, again, much like specifically the Process, but seemingly also the Church of Satan, they have these alien overlord concepts. And again, why wouldn't they? They came from Crowley and his little gray fucker, Lam, alien, little gray alien fucker. And then, then again, you got the L-Rod kind of corporate version of Thelema there with with Scientology, and they have some pretty overt space opera stuff going on there too, with Xenu and his prison planet and all these little thetans that are aliens stuck to everyone's bodies or whatever, whatever. So the the point being is, it seems to me that the origin story of Marvel and DC Comics pretty demonstrably focus around Forrest J. Ackerman, the Agape Lodge, Scientology, the concepts surrounding these philosophies of these cult philosophies and concepts. And I do genuinely feel like, given the nature of proclivities of the men who have done these things and perpetrated these ideas, be it focused within psychological operations and, again, hypnotism, that there is some hypnotic or psychological operation quality to these narratives and storylines being perpetrated through the DC and Marvel Comics storylines, comics, and films to achieve what I presume is to achieve the ends of convincing the rest of the general public of their Looney Tune, Ancient Alien Cargo Cult ideas, meaning they want to convince everyone else of the aliens, right? And more, in a general sense, right? So I do think there's an aspect of psychological operations and hypnotism that is built within that framework, right? And I think the idea that Forrest J. Ackerman would be involved in all of these activities, from Superman to Marvel Comics stuff to being the main dude behind this whole science fiction writer movement, again, the folks that would comprise the work of these comics, right? These pulp fiction, science fiction writers, where he's not only the ringleader of that sci-fi club that L. Ron hypnotized, and they were all doing cult stuff together, but also the fact that he was a literary agent for basically every science fiction writer that's popular from that era, and including L. Ron's old college roommate, Mr. Army Psychological Operations himself, Paul Linebarger, aka Cordwainer Smith, who, again, if you want to look at his sci-fi stuff and some of the stuff he published, some of the psychological operations that seem apparent in there, it seems pretty apparent when he embeds messages such as, I'm trying to remember one of the stories, if you take the first, there's a cryptography spook name for this activity, but if you take the first letter of every sentence, on a page, and you just take the first letter and it spells out a word or a sentence, right? Phrase. And I believe it's if you do that in one of Linebarger's work as under the name Cordwainer Smith, it spells out Oswald didn't shoot, and I believe something else embedded about the JFK assassination. So these when I say when I'm inferring that these comic books or these sci-fi stories, DC or Marvel, or the works of Cordwainer Smith, Paul Linebarger, U.S. Army Captain, Psychological Operations Manual himself, when I'm saying that there's some hypnotic aspects to this stuff, and to try to convince folks of these ancient alien cargo cult ideas, and that there's a psychological operations component to it, I think that's pretty apparent when you look at stuff like, again, Paul Linebarger, part of the same group and college roommate of L. Ron's, and he's embedding messages in his sci-fi works about the JFK assassination. So don't think it's a far concept to consider, folks. And I think all bets are off when you consider Cocaine Bob's in the mix, right? Cocaine Bob meets Marvel Comics. So that's a lot of information. And if I can leave with one other note, folks of the interwebs, I appreciate everyone's time here tonight. I wish I had the aptitude and ability to keep up with the chat while maintaining this narrative in my brain hole. However, I do not. Trying to get lost as it is. Probably should take notes, but I would just get lost in this note. So I just gotta maintain the old narrative and the old brain hole here. So, but I appreciate as I'm looking at the chat, I see it's very active. I appreciate folks commenting and enjoying the show, looks like, as well. And apparently destroying my childhood, and I'm good at doing stuff like that. I am the wrecker of a lot of things. Apologies, it was your childhood, but sometimes things are caught in the line of fire. No, but I hope folks have enjoyed the show here tonight. And Zizzy, when I say not only is these psychological operations and how these things get good to see you there, Kane. Looking forward to their next purge. I highly recommend folks interested in the Idaho 4 murder case, the case of the state of Idaho versus Brian Kohberger. I highly recommend folks go check out Kane B's The Purge, where I like to join Kane as as he calls me, the ghost, the co-ghost, so the co-host, on a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly purging roundup on the Idaho 4 case. So good times and some great conversation with the purgers. Good to see you there, Kane. And apparently I'm getting accused of hypnotizing folks. I promise you that is not me. I'm not a Marvel or DC Comics Thelemic cultist, nor Zizian. So when I say these folks, these films, these ancient alien cargo cult narratives and storylines have really taken a grasp on, on our society. Yeah, it's pretty apparent. It's not just the Marvel and DC stuff. Like I said, Marvel and DC, these stories take place in a galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago, right? And it's no different with Star Wars, where that phrase comes from, right? At the beginning of Star Wars, that's what they tell you. This is a tale from a galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago. And that film series, that Ancient Alien Cargo Cult film series, has had that's been very impactful on society and culture, right? And it's actually even seen in recent parapolitical events with the Zizian cult. And if you folks of the interwebs are not familiar with the Zizian cult, I'll leave us here tonight on this note about the transgendered Silicon Valley based AI focused rationalist homicidal death cult, who also likes to LARP as Sith lords from the Star Wars films, right? So they were caught running around looking like Star Wars dark Sith lords with some one time wearing some Guy Fawkes masks, some walkie talkies, and some fucking guns. They were running around a children's party at a campground in Northern California, just north of the Bay. That's how they got busted for the felony charges. That was, of course, before they would later be seen doing the same activity around their compound over in Vallejo region. And that was before they went on a multi-state homicidal killing spree across 3 states and faking their deaths. Numerous members faking their deaths numerous times. But nonetheless, these folks, the transgendered, vegan, Silicon Valley based, AI focused rationalist homicidal death cult, the Zizians, they thought they were Sith lords, so they were LARPing around like they're from fucking Star Wars. So these things have a cultural impact on us, these ancient alien cargo cult ideas. There's little to no question at this point, especially when you're talking about Jack Lasoda, aka the Dark Sith Lord himself. This man faked his death numerous times and murdered some folks. This one, he's just in this photograph right here, though, he's just pretending to be dead. This is when he got busted after being found not being dead beforehand, right? That's fake dead. That's fake dead Jack Lasoda. But that's the Sith Lord. He's the head of the Zizians. A NASA guy, software fella, has some clearance and stuff like that. None of these folks are dumb. Again, they're all AI engineer folks, software folks. But nonetheless, this fella's attorney, who helped him, appears to have helped him fake his death by taking in a online obituary into the court and being like, "Well, look, my client's dead, Your Honor. He fell over a boat over in the San Francisco Bay." So that was on the felony charges for LARPing like a Sith Lord with some machine guns around some kids at a park. Him and his cult there, the Zizians. Those were on those felony charges. He faked his death. Again, he murdered some folks later and was arrested here in this photo. But that attorney that seems, by all records, helped him get off, that felony charge and be presumed dead for almost 2 years before some cops went to go arrest another one of his cult members in a hotel in Maryland and said, "Oops, surprise. He's alive. He'd been dead for a while, but he helped murder this cult member's parents, apparently, and he's awaiting trial for the same." That's one of their multi-state murder sprees. Nonetheless, that attorney, he's not that far separated from tonight's discussion, the one that helped him fake his death. He, as I covered in a previous Operation GCD Live a number of weeks back, I believe I entitled the Zizians and their best friends, go into greater detail on his attorney, the Sith Lord here, his attorney being deeply connected, and I mean deeply connected to the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Again, Cocaine Bob's friends, when I say deeply connected, I mean like he's band members with Boyd Rice, one of the neo-process leaders in Church of Satan. I think he's number 2 in the Church of Satan, supposedly. Tracy Twyman's old mentor. And the Zith Lord attorney is also connected to the Best Friends Animal Society. Those nice folks down there in Kanab, Utah, the Process Church with a new name. And he's friends with their chief pit bull lobby attorney, right? The guy who represents their pit bull lobby. They're always trying to save all these pit bulls. And that pit bull lobby attorney was just connected to what an Ohio court recently called the serial killer of dogs, because the man murked a bunch of dogs, stole a bunch of money, a Humane Society officer. I also speak about him in that same show, and was financially supported by the Best Friends Animal Society as one of their top pit bull trainers, and across fleeing charges in Ohio and going to California, financed him again with some new pit bull operation. The U.S. Marshals picked him up, brought him back to Ohio. No one's really asked a lot of questions since, seemingly, at least publicly, because that man's also connected to the disappearance of his girlfriend from 2004, the case of Maura Murray. But that pit bull trainer, his father was a pit bull trainer to the stars, and his clients just happened to be a lot of old Cocaine Bob's friends. So from the Zizian's attorney to the neo-process leader, his bandmate Boyd Rice, to his relationship with this Best Friends Animal Society pit bull lobby attorney, who was apparently associated with the quote-unquote recent Ohio serial killer of dogs. A lot of murder, a lot of weird stuff around these folks. But once again, you look at the serial killer of dogs. His dad goes right back to Bob Cocaine Evans and his friends, like Phil Spector. Back to that Laurel Canyon scene where Jared Leto owns the old movie studio, right? The man who's behind that, all that music from the 60s, the weird scenes inside the canyon, as Dave McGowan called it. That man in the Wall of Sound, aka the band, the studio band, the Wrecking Crew that recorded all that music, that man was Phil Spector. And again, Phil Spector, one of the primary clients of the serial killer of dogs, Best Friends Animal Society's top pit bull trainer. It's his father's, one of his father's long-term clients, according to his father's own biography, websites, and training pictures, dog training pictures. So he was the Hollywood dog trainer to the stars, apparently. And his son's the serial killer of dogs. And apparently, from every angle, gets back to the process and folks in and around Cocaine Bob and in and around these weird cult activities that old Forrest Ackerman himself said, California's a hotbed. Southern California's a hotbed for cults. We were all doing Elron's thing, and then I'm quoting Ackerman, then we were all doing Elron's new thing. So, from Thelema to Scientology, it's all Thelema, if you ask me. To the process, still Thelema. So, Ancient Alien Cargo Cultists and Thelemic fan fiction seems to permeate our society in a great deal. And, again, seems to, no, I'm not going to say always, but especially when you're talking Hollywood. I mean, you're talking Bob Cocaine Evans. So I hope you folks in the interwebs enjoyed tonight's show, and thanks for joining me here to get a little GCD, and hope you all enjoy some more Bob Cocaine Evans in your life, because I'm sure this is not the last time we're going to hear from old Bob Cocaine Evans.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, then check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.